Beginning in 1891, a man named Francis Lynde Stetson, who was an attorney, financial attorney to J.P. Morgan, decided that he wanted to have a gentleman's farm up here in Ringwood. And he made several major purchases, the two biggest purchases being the Morris Farms and other smaller land purchases as well, until he had accumulated about 1,500 acres up here. And he began his farming operation. He had just about everything you could think of. The farming operation actually paid for the maintenance of the site. He built himself a fine home on this site. It was a Victorian mansion, 35 rooms, stone house also, but that's not the house you're looking at right now. All the other buildings on the property today were built at the time of Mr. Stetson's ownership. He passed away after his farm operation had been going on up here for many years. He had a piggery, he had a dairy, he had a herd of sheep, he had a shepherd, especially to take care of his herd of sheep. And he had a farming operation. They raised crops, and he had gardens up here as well, but not to the extent that the gardens are developed today. His gardening operation was not quite as big as the farming operation because he depended on that to support the property. He had a reservoir system, 3 gravity-fed ponds up above, and that's still in use today to keep the property well watered. He put in artesian wells for drinking water. His original house was coal heated, and it was not convenienced by electricity. It was gaslit. And the planter that you see there covers the original chute for the coal bin, which is still in place because they kept that as a backup system for the current heating system. What happened was that in 1920, Mr. Stetson passed away. He had an acquaintance by the name of Clarence Mackenzie Lewis. They both served on the board of the New York Botanical Gardens. Mr. Lewis and his wife had a farm nearby in Mahwah called Sheffield Hope Farm. Mr. Lewis came up here many times to sire his horses with Mr. Stetson's horses. Not only did he have riding horses, he had work horses as well. And he was very familiar with the property. When Mr. Stetson passed away, his mother had been recently widowed, and Mr. Lewis, unfortunately, had recently lost his wife. His marriage was very young, only 10 years old, when his wife passed away. So he convinced his mother, who was Helen Forbes Lewis Solomon, that together they should purchase the property and build a house up here that would be a replica of a European Renaissance house. He wanted something that would look as though it had been here for about 400 years. So that's what you see here today. They tore Mr. Stetson's fine home down. They hired a very competent architect, John Russell Pope, to design this house. He already had an acquaintanceship with the property because St. Luke's Chapel down on the road to Shepherd Lake was one of his very earliest commissions, and that was built as a memorial to J.P. Morgan's physician. He also hired a very fine builder, Elliott C. Brown, the name of the builder. If you go into Grand Central Terminal in New York, you will see Mr. Brown's name on a plaque. He was one of the builders of Grand Central Terminal. He hired a stone cutter, McLaren & Son, from Brooklyn. They cut the stone for this house right here on the property at Pearson Ridge, and very carefully cut and marked it so that when the house was completed, the weathered side of the stone would face outward, giving the appearance of age that they hoped to attain. They hired another firm, also from New York, Henneke & Smith, to design these leaded windows. They had to be designed around a stained glass medallion collection that was purchased by Mrs. Solomon in Europe that would be placed in the windows, and they all do date back to the Renaissance period. I'll point out as many as I can when we go inside. Mr. Henneke did some very special designs himself for the house, and I'll point those out too. About the house, truly a Renaissance house would only have, a Renaissance manor house of this type would only have 2 full stories. But Mother was gone quite often. She would travel to Europe to make purchases mainly for the interior of the home. While she was gone, her son thought about the design of the house. He wanted something bigger and finer, and he had his architect add that third story. That turned out to be a bit of folly. It added considerably to the cost of the house. The cost of the house for construction only was about $850,000 to $900,000, but total cost of the house was more about $2.1 million, and before that Mr. Stetson had invested over $3 million in the property up here. So for that time period, it was a lot of money. Well, what happened with that third story, after they put the slate roof on, they discovered the sun hit it in the summertime, and the third floor was so hot it was almost unusable in the summertime. And believe it or not, this was just a summer home for Clarence Mackenzie Lewis and his 2 children. And it was just a summer residence for Mr. Stetson as well. Some other features of the house, this construction over here that looks like a carport, and that's what it wound up being, was really supposed to be a chapel. But Mother was gone, as I said, and she and her son had some differences about the construction of the house. She didn't like that third story at all, and that was the breaking point between Mother and son. He had a car, he had a Pierce Arrow, and I think I have a picture of a Pierce Arrow in here. Oh, I didn't show you. This is Mr. Elliott C. Brown, the builder, and his wife, very tall man. And somewhere in here, here is a picture of a Pierce Arrow. And Mr. Lewis was very fond of his car, not quite so fond of his driver. So he wanted his car near the house where he could keep an eye on it. And when Mother came back for her final visit up here, and she saw that, she told her driver from New York he could turn around and take her home. This was not really her house anymore, because she was supposed to have a chapel in her house, and it is not there. The section of the house over there that has a regular shingle roof was added when Shelton College was here. I'll tell you more about that inside. That's the annex that the caterer now uses for a meal that's served for some type of celebration usually. The stacks above the chimneys even were specially treated so that they would have the appearance of age. They stained them before they were put in place so they would look as though they were well used. What else can I tell you about the house? Mr. Lewis liked to use his house to make references to the people who lived and worked here, to his interests, and I'll point that out as we go along too. The section of the house there, or the Tudor section over there, is made of wattle and daub. And that's not stucco as we know it today. It's a lot more stable property. It's got concrete in it and ashlar for fireproofing and even horsehair to make it more stable. And it will be soon worked on. I hear that the state is going to have somebody come in and do some restoration work on the wooden section of the house so it doesn't deteriorate. Let's go a little closer. I'll point out a few more things and then we'll go inside. I'll stop again here so you can see. I want to point out the scuppers coming down from the gutters up above. They are all specially designed. Every single one is different. And this one over here is dated 1925, I believe. That's when that section of the house was completed. They are made of copper, but they have a lead overlay so that they could be stamped with individual designs. There's a beautiful circular stairway here that, well, shouldn't say the stairway itself is so beautiful, but there's a beautiful iron railing on the upper floors, and the man responsible for that and all the ironwork that you'll see here in the house is Samuel Yellen. He had 2 smithies, one in New York and another in Philly, and his family is still in business today. They have a business in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, I think. He was a very good employer, according to some research that was done on him. If you did your job right, you were very well rewarded for your work. He was a very good boss. So I wish I could show you this, the railing inside. Unfortunately, we don't go out on that stairway at all. If you look at these fixtures over here, the outdoor fixtures, they are iron, but a special type called Monel. It does not rust. So as you see them, with their nice patina that they take on over the years, is as they would have been originally. They have never been restored in any way. They've stood up well all these years. This turreted balcony up above was a favorite place of Mr. Lewis. He could go up there in the morning as he took his coffee, and he could look over his property and know how he wanted to direct his staff of 60 or more gardeners for the day as to what needed to be done. But they knew when he was up there. They appointed a lookout as well, so that they knew when the boss was coming in, they would be prepared and be very, very busy at their jobs when he arrived. Over here, you have a swan above the doorway because there's a swan pond on the property here, so that is the reference for the swan above the doorway. Mr. Lewis put his initials on that shield alongside the entry. But Mother was neglected again. I mean, are her initials there? No, you see grapevines on the other side. These would be the way the Renaissance men would look at the time period that the house would have been built if it was 400 years ago. So they tucked them in place to give it more authenticity. And now I think that's enough for outside. Let's go in. A second welcome. You are in the main entrance to the manor house. If you look up above, you will see a ceiling that looks like wood, but it is actually reverse stamp molded plaster. And it's either been stained or painted to look like wood. An interesting fact was that the architect who designed this house trained in France at the same place that the two architects that designed the New York Public Library were trained, and if you ever go to that site, you'll see some similarities in architecture between the two sites. At any rate, the paneling on the wall is American oak, and it's all been carved and cut and put in place by local craftsmen. The little sconces over there, the lighting fixture up above, are the work of Mr. Yellen. The house may not have been here for 400 years, but it may stand that long because it is steel framed. Anything that was tops in construction at the time the house was built went into the building of this house. The first floor is all concrete, and whenever you see a wood floor, it's been placed over concrete. Beautiful parquet floors on the second floor. I wish I could take you up there. At any rate, we'll have to split out in two groups to take a look at the ladies' hospitality room because it is small. And so maybe about half of you can go in first. I'll stand outside the room. You'll hear the explanation, and then the other people can go in afterwards. The room is the original color. The lighting fixture is original. The room has a French flavor to it. If you look in the window, you'll see one of Mr. Henneke's very special engravings for the house. It's staining and etching to produce pictures of, or to produce a glass picture of a person who would have lived here, or a person who would have worked here, or something that would have been growing there. If you look down at the floor outside the lavatory there, you'll see a mark in the floor that has not been removed. It is there because there was once a privacy screen blocking the view of the lavatory if you open the door. So a house guest would be invited to come and use this room if necessary, to put an outer garment in the wardrobe there and just relax a little bit before the day's activities began. As you can see, it's currently being used by the catering staff. All right, if some of you will come out, please, and give the other people an opportunity to go in and look over what I just explained to them, and then we'll... You'll see the gentleman's hospitality room. None of the furnishings in there are original to the house. The only exception are the hat and coat racks on the wall. But you will see two of Mr. Henneke's special stained glass pieces on the window. I believe there's a rooster on one window and someone doing a planter on the other one. There's a lavatory there for the men's use as well. Not quite so nice as the women's, a lot smaller, not so roomy, but good enough.
What would be nice?
After all, Mr. Lewis was a widower, so he probably preferred his lady guest. Up above my head, you see more reverse stamp molded plaster. I did not point out the fact that the thistle has been carved into the wood over that Gothic arch, and there's a reason for that. Mr. Lewis's heritage was Scottish, and he was proud of that, and thistle is a symbol of Scotland. But he cannot deny New Jersey. He was born in Jersey City. Here you have the main stairway. It's all American oak, all been carved by local craftsmen, and a large portion of the stained glass medallion collection up there. And it shows off to advantage because there's no protective shield behind it. It gets the full light. As we go through the house, you'll see that others are protected by a plexiglass shield, which has unfortunately turned cloudy. That is one of Mr. Yellen's lighting fixtures up above there. And above my head here, you'll see carved into the stonework, bats. Mr. Lewis was fond of Asian art. And to someone of that persuasion, Asian persuasion, you would think that bats are a good luck symbol because they do kill harmful insects, and that's the reason that they are there, to bring good luck into the house. I see we forgot a light switch here. And here it is. Behind this door is one of the very earliest Otis home elevators, but I'm told not to open the door, but that's what was there for Mrs. Salomon's use. Unfortunately, she never did get to use it before the house was fully completed in 1927. She passed away. So she, with her son, put a fortune into this house, but never got to enjoy it for living quarters. I tell everybody if it were summertime that this would be early air conditioning. There is a ventilating system in the house, but the small porch out there was screened. This entryway was screened. And if you opened both doors, you had cross ventilation. You opened the doors to the rooms and you brought fresh air into the house and kept it cool in the summertime. Up above, oak beams, reverse stamp molded plaster, a nice leafy pattern cut into the stonework, and Mr. Yellen's lighting fixtures on the wall. No original furniture here in the hallway, not even the clock with the swan on its face. That was a donation. Let's go into the dining room. I spoke about Mrs. Salomon going to Europe to make purchases for the room and for the house itself, and you are in a purchased room. All the wall paneling in this room, with the exception of 9 of these pilasters along the walls, was brought here from a manor house in Lyme Regis, England. And if you have ever seen the movie A French Lieutenant's Woman, you would see some scenes taken in Lyme Regis, England. The house presented, I'm sure, quite a challenge to the architect. Mr. Pope had to design this house among many things that already existed, but he did win an architectural prize for the completion of the home in its category when he was done with his work. This door goes to a butler's pantry. There's another one in the another door in the breakfast room, and it serviced both rooms. The kitchen was behind there, and they had a summer kitchen as well. If it was a very warm day, they did not cook on the first floor of the house. They used the kitchen downstairs to keep the house cooler. Things in the kitchen have been changed. There is some original cabinet work in there, but not too much of the original kitchen, so we won't go there. I want to point out the marquetry above the fireplace. Even the fireplace wood was part of the purchase. Marquetry is a skill that people are losing these days. It's an art by which you take a base wood and you cut other types of wood to form a picture and set it into the base. So there you have 2 fine examples of marquetry. Another very intricate reverse stamp molded plaster ceiling up overhead. And those are the original furnishing, or the original light fixtures to the room, as you can see in the picture of the room as it was originally furnished. That is an original piece of furniture, the server over there, and the buffet over there original as well. The server is initialed AR and CL. Anna Churchill Ripley was Mrs. Lewis's maiden name. And CL, of course, for Clarence Lewis, 1908, the date of their wedding. Unfortunately, she passed away in 1918. And he was left to raise his children with the help of his housekeeper governess, who was Mrs. Fitzpatrick. Dad was a strict father, and Mrs. Fitzpatrick enforced all the rules. So she was not too well liked by the children. They didn't like all the rules and regulations they had to follow all day long up here. The silver service was found on eBay by one of our volunteers from the association that supports the gardens up here. They do much to keep this place going by gaining funds from the different affairs they run, and also by physical labors as well. I don't think the state at this point, with the number of people who are on staff, could maintain the gardens the way they are maintained without the help of volunteers. But to get back to the silver service, it's engraved, Skylands. Somebody spotted it on eBay, used association funds to bring it back to what they thought was its original place or original home. So there it is for you to see. If you look over here at the window, you'll see some of the stained glass collection pieces. 1, 2, 3 of them from Switzerland. They all came from either Switzerland or Germany, even though they were in the possession of an English collector. You have one from Basel, one from Bern, one from Zug. Those are 3 Swiss cantons. This one is from a state in Germany that I'm told no longer exists. And there is a date on one of them, I believe, a 1500 date, which attests to the time period that the house is supposed to represent. The lighting fixtures are pewter. They were part of the purchase as well. They probably held candles originally, and then they were wired for electricity. They weren't even in place on this picture. This picture, I believe, was taken in 1934, and they were not in place yet. Over here you have a Carolien cabinet. It's a Renaissance piece, and it is used for storage. And even today, it's being used for storage. So it has not lost its original purpose. All the heating elements in the house are concealed, either behind grill work or, in this case, underneath that window seat, which would have had a velvet cushion on it. Let's go into the breakfast room. We're going to be crowded in here. Are we in? We're pretty much so. Anyway, this is the room where the children had to appear at 8 o'clock every morning, fully dressed. Breakfast was served at that hour, and they better be here. And that was another one of Dad's rules. They had a very nice view from the breakfast room, and every room in this house was designed with a vista or a view in mind, so that you were never without something pleasurable to the eye, no matter what room you entered. The marble in this room actually is in its 3rd home. It comes from Italy, and then it made its way to the 5th Avenue mansion that the Salomons owned in New York. And that mansion was to be torn down when this house was being built. So anything of great value that was in place there and could be put in place here was brought to this house. So all solid marble, the walls, the floor. The lavabo, also in its 3rd home, comes from a Venetian palazzo. Here it had a particular purpose. It was used for either plants or flowers. The little cherubs have spouts in their mouths so water could be brought in to keep things fresh. It has a bit of the mythological tone to it. The 2 lovely ladies supporting the upper structure were called harpies. In mythology, they are said to fly around and make a harpy, screechy, scary sound, and so they are placed there. That's what they are. Down below, supporting the basin, are griffins. It probably in its original site was more of a ceremonial thing, might have been used for baptism or things of that nature. Up above you have a monastery censer. That's been wired for electricity, maybe meant for the chapel, but it did find a home. And there's another smaller one in the elevator alcove. If you look at the reverse stamp molded ceiling here, you'll see that they probably designed it to pick up the pattern of the lavabo. And that's the other door to the butler's pantry. Enough about this room. Let's take a little walk out to the porch. Enjoy the view. The color is lovely today. When the property was purchased by Mr. Lewis and his mother, this terrace was much narrower. But Mr. Lewis really enjoyed a view. And so he had truckload after truckload of fill brought up here and expanded the terrace, and the retaining wall was built at that time. So you do have a view of Wanacue Reservoir from here. The trees are still blocking it, but if you're here in the wintertime, you can see the reservoir from here. And they could see it too under construction. Their first summer here was when construction of the reservoir began, so they could watch it through the years be developed and fill in. Something else to observe while they were here. This porch would have been screened originally, as I told you before. It's been glassed in for security purposes. That is the Japanese ceremonial bell. It does not have a clapper inside. And we could give it another tap if somebody near the bell wants to tap it. It has a nice sound. I don't know what ceremony it was used for. It did have a striking object that hung on that little hook. And we know for sure it is Japanese because one of the volunteers here is Japanese. And she said, because of the way it is dated, it's not Chinese, it is definitely Japanese. And she said, and now don't you let the Chinese people who come up here claim it. And I don't have a true history to tell you on the bell. I've never found anything available in the records that they keep up here. You can see this is nicely cut stone over here, foxes above the doorways, and I'll point out again the carving in the Tudor section of the house over there is a great vine carved in the wood up above, which will soon be improved in appearance, we hear. And here is one of Mr. Yellen's lighting fixtures outside the doorway. Let's walk through the center hall again, and we're going to go into the Great Hall. This is the Great Hall. It's a room that's really meant for entertaining in a manor house. I like the acoustics in here. They're very good. The room extends almost the full height of the building at this point. It's about 23 or 24 feet high. Those beams that you're looking up above are called jesting beams because they don't really support the ceiling. They're there to entertain the eye. The corbels, the architectural supports underneath the beams there are truly a replica of something you would see in a Renaissance period building. If you visited any very old churches, public buildings in Europe, you might see the same thing. On that side of the room, you have an organ loft, but unfortunately, an organ was never placed there. Of course, when we do have holiday open house here, we always have some form of music, usually emanating from each room, and either there is live music up there or recorded music that you can enjoy while you are in the room. But Mr. Lewis, even without an organ, found a purpose for that. The center is carved with a musical theme. The center of the organ loft is hinged. The center panel opens. And he would go up there with a projector. He liked silent movies, primarily because he was hearing impaired. And so that was something that gave him pleasure. He would put a projector up there and a movie screen over here, and he would show silent movies for his own entertainment or that of anyone who cared to join him. The stone walls up above once held several tapestries. You can see the marks of what was once there. I don't know what happened to them. I know that they attempted to clean the walls to bring them back to their original condition, but they resisted. So you can tell what was once there, and you can see them in the pictures of the room, the picture of the room over there. This tapestry arrived with the caterer. It's the first time I've ever seen a tapestry framed. Usually they hang on rods. The piece over there is not original to the house. It actually belongs to Ringwood Manor, but it is an interesting piece. It's a pianoforte. It opens to reveal 72 keys. The pianoforte doesn't usually have a full 88 keys. It has the number of octaves that the designer felt it would accommodate. And they did call this a coffin piano at times because the legs are removable. If it had to be transported, it could be placed on some type of cart, and as it went through the streets on a cart or a wagon, it would look like a coffin. So they gave it that terminology. The walls here partially come from another site. I don't know where, the wood on the walls. It is probably hand-planed up above. You can see the difference In the planing up above, between that and the wood paneling below the chair rail, which had to be added to complete the room. If you look over that doorway, you'll see that they've cut squirrels in the Gothic arch. Over here, you have dragons. If you like any form of architecture or life that you enjoy, you'd probably find in this room. You have the country life here with the acorns carved into the wood, and then you have the Orient, you have the dragons and the dragon heads on the lighting fixtures that Mr. Yellen designed. You can find most anything here. But Mr. Lewis himself was very, very fond of this fireplace. He had it copied. The original is in San Simeon, the Hearst Estate in California, and this is a copy. I think it cost between $4,000 and $5,000 to copy it, and his fondness of it was due to the coat of arms that appears above. That was designed at the time of James I when Scotland was recognized as part of the British Empire. There are 13 fireplaces in the house. Everyone is a different size. This is the largest. I say when I have young children on the tour that this is Santa Claus's choice. No trouble making an entry through that fireplace. It has a very nice decorative heat-reflecting panel in the back, stamped with a design. Sometimes they're just very, very plain to serve their purpose of bringing heat into the room. Throughout the rooms in the house, you'll see gadgets like this. There's a button over here, and even a speaker. Over there by that doorway, there's a button. Here and there throughout every room in the house are buttons that could be used to get services to the room. In the staff kitchen, there was a board on the wall with a series of lights, a light corresponding to every room in the house, and there are, well, I don't know that basement rooms had that type of thing, but there are 45 rooms in the house. If a light went on, you knew that something was needed in that room, and whoever was keeping an eye on the light-up board would come and perform the service that was needed. They conceal things, as I pointed out here. You have the radiator underneath the window seat, and even in this room, they concealed the controls for the lights. They're behind this panel. Didn't like things like that to show. A true manor's house wouldn't have built in the Renaissance period would not have any modern conveniences as we know them today. Over here, I see you're touching that nice cold table. That's fine, you can touch it. It's sort of hard to damage. It's all solid marble, and it's served a purpose in a great hall if the lord of the manor went out with a hunting party, and it was bountiful. They brought the bounty of the hunt into the great hall and displayed it on a nice cold table to keep it fresh until it was prepared for a meal. I think I've covered just about anything and everything in this room except for the largest portion of the stained glass medallion collection. I believe there are 20 pieces in that big window. A lot of them are religious in nature. You have the crucifixion over here. You have St. George slaying the dragon, and there goes Jonah over the side as the whale awaits him. You have another piece from Byrne up there. I tell everybody that's St. Michael over there because a warrior seems to be receiving a blessing. You have two pieces from Nuremberg. And on the lower window, you have a 1500 date on that piece too, attesting to the fact that they are truly Renaissance pieces. Follow me, we're going into the Octagonal Hole. And this area is exactly as it was when the family lives here. Colors of the wall, very subdued, just the way it was. The lighting fixture was missing. When the state took over the property in 1966, after Shelton College had abandoned the property, Barbara Lewis Zinser, Mr. Lewis's daughter, visited here. She wanted to see what was happening with their old summer home. And the workmen were working in this area. She told them exactly how it had been painted. They followed her instruction and restored it to its original condition, including the lighting fixture was missing. And they found it in the basement and rewired it and put it back in place. This was an area used frequently by both family members and staff here in the house, because from this hallway you could access any level of the house. You could go from basement to the 3rd floor without having to walk any distance. If you went up the main stairway of the house, you'd find that there are areas of the house that are up a couple of steps or down a couple of steps. Well, you didn't encounter that here. You could make your way to the house, through the house, with just the one main stairway over there. But if you look in this window, you'll see another one of Mr. Henneke's engravings. I believe it's someone sowing seed. And in the Renaissance period, that's the way they would have gone through the fields, sowing seed. In that closet, which is now a closet but was not originally, was a device that went down to the wood storage bins in the basement. It was actually a type of dumbwaiter. And they did have a couple of dumbwaiters here in the house for food, so that if they cooked in the basement, they could bring food up to the 1st floor. Or if they cooked anywhere in the kitchen in the 1st floor or down in the basement, they could bring the food up to an upper level of the house. But here, strictly for wood, they cut the wood according to the size of the fireplace. They had a wagon wheel type device in there, marked for every fireplace in the house. And if the house were to be heated with wood, that's where you would get the wood for the fireplace. And there was someone who lived here year-round to make sure that everything was functioning properly, and especially in the winter months. She was Scandinavian, so she did not mind being up here in the winter at all. It was the type of climate she was used to, so she probably enjoyed it. And people still do come up here in the wintertime, and they have skis. They can do cross-country skiing behind the manor, behind the carriage house. You'll see that if you come up here when there's snow on the ground. I think I've told you enough about this area. Let us go into the drawing room. A manor house would have a drawing room. The sign on the door may say living room, and that apparently was here when Barbara Lewis Zinser visited. But she said, oh my, no, that should be changed, because a manor house has a drawing room or withdrawing room. And it was a place where the family or family and guests would go after a meal would be served to relax and enjoy one another's company and conversation. And that's the purpose of the drawing room. The walls in the room are all Scandinavian pine. I thought it was interesting. Last month, I had a couple on my tour that had lived in Norway for about 4 years. And they walked in here, and the woman said to her husband, "This room smells like Norway." So I guess Scandinavian pine holds its scent forever. But the room itself, the paneling in the room itself, came from a manor house in Derbyshire, England. The carved wood is not, of course, pine, it's pear wood. And the fireplace is faced with marble. Even the hearth is marble. The lighting fixtures, I believe, are something that was designed in the 20s. They have an Art Deco look to them. The original ceiling fixtures are missing. If you look at the picture over there, you'll see some lovely Waterford chandeliers. And that's what was here originally. We don't know whether they were sold at auction or what happened to them. I was rather surprised to have Mr. Lewis's grandson, Clarence Mackenzie Lewis III, visit here and celebrate his 70th birthday here, and tell me that when his grandfather let the property go to Shelton College, he held an auction and sold many of the things that were in the house. So we thought that they disappeared at the time of Shelton College's occupation, but that was not entirely true. Some things were probably left behind, and maybe they did disappear later on, but a lot of things were sold at auction. I didn't point out in the Octagonal Hole that has a Greek flavor to it. You saw the key of life above the doorways, and you'll see that Greek type of pattern repeated here. And the pediments above the doorways also have a Greek flavor to them. That corner over there was a writing corner that had a small lady's desk over there, and it was a writing corner and furnished in that way. I don't think you can see that in the picture. They did have a baby grand piano over there, stood away from those windows, and that was in here as well. The room was very nicely furnished. I won't take you out on the larger porch, which is here, but if you walk around the house later, you can get a good view of it. It's at least double or more the size of the one porch that you saw today, and there's a lovely fireplace out there. If you sat there on a cool evening, you could have a fire going and enjoy the sunset. Mr. Stetson's house is gone, but his flagpole is still here, and it flies the flag of the United States, of course, and of the state of New Jersey. I think anything that you see on the shelves as far as books are concerned or artwork on the walls did not belong to the Lewises. It came here with the recent caterer. They had a portrait over the fireplace, not necessarily a family member. Mr. Salomon had a collection of French portraits, and I saw those listed in an old auction catalog when the house on Fifth Avenue was going to be torn down. So maybe one of the portraits that did not sell was there. I really don't have any history of what was there, but we do have a book that has been published on the site. And if you're really interested in a full background of the property and how everything came to be up here, you would buy a copy of the book. It's down in the carriage house, both in hardcover and in soft cover. And we were very fortunate when someone came up here several years ago for a holiday open house. They spoke to one of our volunteers and said, you know, it would be really a good idea to do a book about this place, and I think I can help you. I think I can get you a grant for that purpose. And he did. So we were very happy to have that money and put the book together and be able to offer it to the public to get a full history of the site. This is the last of the stained glass medallion collection that you'll see on the first floor. You have another piece here with a 1500 date on it and another from Bern. This is probably a memorial piece. It has names engraved in the glass. And you can see on these lower windows, the plexiglass has turned cloudy. And if you know anybody who would be willing to endow the association with the money to replace that plexiglass with a different type of material that doesn't turn cloudy, please let us know. We would appreciate it. That's enough about this room. Let us go into and be very tight in the most elaborately carved room in the house. Well, now you surely know why Mr. Lewis really didn't like this room. His mother had a particular desire that he use this room for a study because the carved doors and panels in this room came from Mr. Salomon's study in the Fifth Avenue mansion. And so she wanted to have her son replicate his study for his use. Actually, the panels here come from a German Renaissance wardrobe. The doors are 2 3/4 inches thick. When they are closed, they create a vacuum so that nothing that was stored back there would deteriorate or be destroyed by any kind of destructive moth or whatever that could get into fabric. The room went under some renovation when a caterer was here some years ago, and also when Shelton College was here. I think mainly when Shelton College was here, they decided to varnish these panels, and everything turned as black as this one that has never been restored. I believe it was more than 15 years ago that the state hired a master restorer by the name of D.D.A. Kogan to work on this room. He supervised the work, and he knew which materials to use and exactly how to do things, but actually the room was restored by a group of volunteers that came up here every Wednesday for almost 3 years to put the room back to its original condition. The wood that is carved is not all the same type. The dark wood, maybe black walnut, which lends itself very well to carving. They put scaffolding up to do the ceiling. It was a very messy job. I know that because my husband worked on the restoration.
And my sister
and I got all the dirt. And that's right, Gail's niece as well. And I got all the dirty clothes.
And she had to leave because of the fumes. So I know exactly, Dorothy. It's 20 years old because Erica
Is it that
now
long?
20 and she's in James Madison now.
Wow. Well, now I found out how many years. Now I found out how many years I've been volunteering up here, because people ask me and I say, "Oh, it's so many years I've forgotten." But at any rate, this room does have a nice parquet floor. It hasn't been restored because they ran out of restoration money before they got that far. But Mr. Lewis never used the room as his study. He did not like it. It was too small and too dark. Mainly it was used by his housekeeper, Mrs. Fitzpatrick, for storage. He did keep some records here, gardening records and whatnot, in the cabinets, but he spent a lot of time in the library, which is a much bigger area room, and he enjoyed that much more. So let us move on to the library, and that will be the last room on our tour. To the room itself, this room is all American oak, and it's been created by local craftsmen, with the exception of Mr. Yellen's lighting fixtures up above, but he would never take credit for the track lighting. I'm sure he would not like that at all. I don't know when that came to be, but it really doesn't fit in. I wish they could light up the room more effectively without the use of that. But the local craftsmen even carved the wood over the fireplace. The fireplace never had a fender to begin with. Someone donated that to the site several years ago. And Rich Flynn, who does a wonderful job up here for the state of New Jersey with the gardens and many other things as well, went through the whole house measuring out 13 fireplaces and decided this was the best spot for it. Mr. Lewis had his desk placed over there in the corner. You can see that in the picture. He liked to keep an eye on things, and he could see both front entrances for that. From that point, he spent a lot of time in here because he was an avid reader. His two favorite subjects being horticulture, of course, and architecture. And up above there, on the openings above the shelves, he had busts of famous architects. The glassed-in cabinets held a collection of jade. Again, his interest in Asian art. And he had glass shelves over here that held Japanese tea bowls. They were a gift from his mother-in-law, a housewarming gift. When the house was completed, she wanted him to have something special, and that's what she gave him. The children had to spend a specified time in here every day because their father wanted them to be well-read as well. He didn't much care what they read. He didn't supervise what they read, but the time he supervised. They had duties here. They had horses on the property. While they were here, they had to ride those horses. They had to groom them. They had to see that they were well-fed and well-exercised. And Barbara, when she visited here, said that they were so strong and so stubborn, they forever killed her desire to ride. As I told you, they had a series of gravity-fed reservoirs up here, and there was a pond on the property as well called Gatun Pond. And they had a little dressing room there at the pond and a dock. They could go over there and swim if they liked, but it was a 1.5 mile walk each way, and Dad did not drive them, even though they were 18 miles of Rollstone Road here on the property. He told them they could walk if they wanted to swim, and they could walk back. It was good exercise. Every day also they had to go trekking around through the woods. He wanted them to know their surroundings and be able to find their way about. So they did that. They satisfied their father's wishes every day. He was a strict dad. Even dinner was a formal affair. They changed their clothes quite often throughout the day. They had to dress for dinner and be there in the dining room at whatever hour dinner was served. Mr. Lewis spent a lot of time in here. As I said, he could go on that circular stairway and go up to his rooms up above. He actually had a suite of 3 rooms, and there was a suite of 3 rooms on the second floor as well, intended for his mother. Unfortunately, she never got to use them. Mr. Lewis was, as I said, a civil engineer. When he finished his education, he worked for a time for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And then when he left the railroad and returned to New York, he worked for his stepfather's brokerage house, handling mostly railroad business. But with this house, he had a special invention of his own design. There's a switch over there, right there, and it controlled a ventilating system for the books. Every shelf has a small open space behind the books, and if you flip the switch, you could bring air behind the books to preserve them. He didn't want them to deteriorate. He wanted to keep everything in good condition. He gave about, I think, over 1,200 items on horticulture to the New York Botanical Gardens when he let the property go to Shelton College. That happened in 1953. He was getting older. He was not that well anymore. The children were not interested in the property. He was finding it difficult to keep things going up here. As I said, originally he had a Pierce Arrow, and someone who had grown up here on the property visited several years ago and said, well, that's not the car I remember up here. The last car on this site that Mr. Lewis owned was a Chevy. So I imagine not only physically was maintenance getting more difficult, but it was quite an expense to maintain this property. So in 1953, he thought Shelton College was the right organization to come in here to establish a second campus. They were a small Christian college in New York. They had a program in architecture. Their investment up here initially was $155,000. I don't know who held the lien on the property, but that was a very small investment considering what was now under their control up here. However, they did not make a success of it up here. In 1964, they simply abandoned the property and went down to a site in South Jersey near Cape May. They didn't succeed there. They then went down to Florida, and they no longer exist today. But we do have students at times visit here and take the tour, and it's very interesting. I mean, it was a wonderful place to get an education. Even though the male students were housed in converted chicken coops, they said the housing wasn't that bad. They did a good job of conversion, and that's where they were. They used all the other buildings on the property for classes, for a library, for housing. The Manor House itself, once in a while, had classes in the Great Hall, but seldom. It was mainly administration. Two young men were rather privileged when the state first took over. They had not completed their education. William Patterson accepted them. They had no housing for them. They had no place to live. So the state let them stay here on the property until they completed their education. So they had quite nice housing. And in 1966, under the administration of Governor Hughes, Green Acres came into being. And this is the very first Green Acres purchase by the state of New Jersey. So at that time, New Jersey paid over $2 million for this site and other acreage up here besides. So I never shed any tears over the fact that Shelton College didn't make a success over things up here, because I enjoy this site myself so much personally. And I know that the public enjoys it, and it's wonderful that the state of New Jersey has this treasure up here for everyone to enjoy. I want to thank you all for your contribution today to the association. It goes right back into the gardens. I want to encourage you to come back for Holiday Open House at the end of the month and into December. We have 4 days up here that the house is open, fully decorated on the first floor, and it's a wonderful time to come up here. So please do. I thank you again for being here. I hope you'll come back often to the other things that enjoy the other things that are going on up here in the grounds themselves. And I'm going to take you out past the circular stairway. As you go out, in the window on your right, you'll see one of Mr. Henneke's special works depicting the man himself, Mr. Lewis. 1928, it says on that engraving, stained glass, and that was their first summer here in the house. So again, follow me and thank you.